Welcome to Once Upon English.
What if one man proved that everything we believed about the universe was wrong? What if the sky wasn't perfect, the earth wasn't the center, and the truth was so dangerous that powerful men tried to destroy anyone who spoke it? What if the man who changed the entire universe wasn't a king, a warrior, or a prophet, but a quiet scientist with a telescope? The boy who asked dangerous questions. Galileo Galilei was born in 1564 in the quiet city of Pisa, Italy, a place of stone streets, old churches, and a famous leaning tower. But from the moment he could speak, he wasn't like other children. Other kids asked simple questions. Galileo asked the kind of questions that made adults uncomfortable. He wanted to know why things fall, not just that they fall. He wanted to know what makes sound travel, not just how it feels. He wanted to know how the heavens move, even though, at that time, nobody dared question the church about the sky. People around him often smiled and said, "Galileo, you think too much." But thinking was the only thing he truly loved. His father, Vincenzo, was a musician, a smart and curious man who believed in logic more than superstition. He saw something in Galileo's eyes, a spark that did not belong to ordinary life, so he encouraged his son to read, experiment, and explore. Every night, young Galileo stayed awake longer than he should, listening to the sounds of the world, the wind through the windows, the echo of someone walking in the hallway, the ringing of metal in the distance. Everything was a mystery waiting to be solved, but there was one moment, one tiny accident that changed everything. One day, Galileo was sitting inside a church in Pisa. The air was still. People were praying, but Galileo wasn't watching them. His eyes were fixed on a small oil lamp hanging from the ceiling. A gust of wind entered, and the lamp began to swing back and forth. Slowly, gently, perfectly. Most people would ignore it, but Galileo didn't. He began counting the seconds between every swing, once, twice, 3 times, and then he noticed something unbelievable. No matter how high or low the lamp swung, the time between each swing stayed exactly the same. It was the first time in his life he realized something powerful. Nature follows rules, and if you can understand the rules, you can understand everything. He didn't know it yet, but this simple swinging lamp would one day change modern medicine, physics, clocks, and even the way we measure time. At that moment, the young boy with messy hair and big questions made a silent promise. "I will spend my life learning how the world truly works." He had no idea how dangerous that promise would become, because soon his questions wouldn't only challenge teachers or scientists. They would challenge the entire universe and the most powerful institution in the world. The moment he realized the world was wrong. Years passed, and Galileo grew into a tall, sharp-eyed young man with a mind that never rested. While other students at the University of Pisa memorized old ideas, Galileo wanted to break them apart. He questioned everything, even the things people believed were unquestionable. His professors taught ideas from Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher. According to Aristotle, heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones. Everyone accepted it. Everyone believed it. Everyone repeated it. Everyone except Galileo. One morning, he walked through the university courtyard with a notebook under his arm. The sun was bright, and the leaning tower cast its long shadow over the ground. Students were chatting, laughing, and complaining about homework. But Galileo wasn't thinking about homework. He was thinking about gravity, a concept nobody had named yet, but one that consumed his thoughts. If an idea is true, he whispered to himself, then it must be true every time. Not just when a philosopher says so. He climbed the leaning tower of Pisa, step by slow step. People watched him curiously. What is he doing? Why is he carrying two metal balls? Is this another one of his strange experiments? When he reached the top, he looked down at the tiny crowd below. In one hand, he held a heavy iron ball. In the other, a smaller, lighter one. He didn't give a speech. He didn't ask permission. He simply said, "Let's see what nature says." Then he dropped both balls at the same time. For 1 second, the world was silent. Then, thud. They hit the ground together, not one after the other, not heavy first, not light first, together. The students gasped. Some laughed in disbelief. Some stared at him like he had just broken a sacred rule. Galileo smiled, not because he was right, but because nature had spoken. What you saw, he told them, is the truth, and truth does not ask for your permission. But the professors, they were furious. To them, challenging Aristotle wasn't just disrespectful, it was dangerous. If Aristotle was wrong about falling objects, what else might he be wrong about? What else might the church be wrong about? Whispers spread through the university halls. Galileo is arrogant. He doesn't respect tradition. He is going to get himself into trouble. And they were right, because Galileo wasn't finished, not even close. He began studying motion, sound, mathematics, anything he could find. His bedroom became a laboratory filled with strange instruments, glass containers, rolling balls, and pendulums. Late at night, candlelight flickered on the walls while Galileo scribbled formulas nobody had ever seen before. But there was one subject he hadn't touched yet, one that would make him famous and turn half the world against him. The sky. Galileo didn't know it yet, but destiny was already pulling him upward, toward the stars, toward a new invention from a faraway land, and toward a discovery that would shake the universe itself. And very soon, he would put his eye to a telescope for the first time, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The night he pointed a new weapon at the sky. Galileo was now a young professor in the city of Padua. His lectures were famous. Students filled every seat, not because they had to, but because Galileo made science feel alive. But even with all the excitement, something inside him felt unfinished, like a door he hadn't opened yet. Then, one afternoon in 1609, a traveler arrived from the Netherlands with a strange rumor. "A device," he whispered in a crowded market, "that can make faraway things look close." Galileo froze. "What kind of device?" he asked. "A spyglass, a tube with glass at both ends. You can see ships before they reach the port. A device that brings the distant closer? A tool that changes what the eyes can see." Galileo felt electricity run through him. That night, he sat at his wooden desk, surrounded by glass lenses, metal frames, and sketches. His hands moved quickly, adjusting angles and grinding glass. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He didn't talk to anyone. The world had given him a rumor. He was going to turn it into a revolution. After days of work, he lifted a long, simple tube to his eye. It wasn't perfect, yet. But when he pointed it at a distant tower, the tower moved closer, sharper, brighter. Galileo laughed, loudly, joyfully, like a child who had discovered a secret door. But he wasn't satisfied, so he improved it, and improved it again, and again. Within weeks, he built a telescope more powerful than anything in Europe. And that was when it happened. The moment that changed the world forever. One warm summer night, when the city was quiet and the sky was dark, Galileo stepped onto his rooftop. He lifted the telescope toward the heavens. No one before him had ever used such a powerful instrument to study the stars. His hands trembled. Slowly, gently, he aimed the telescope at the moon. He expected a perfect, smooth, heavenly sphere, just as Aristotle and the church said it must be. But what he saw broke thousands of years of belief in one instant. The moon wasn't perfect. It had mountains, valleys, shadows, and craters. A world as rough and imperfect as Earth. Galileo stepped back in shock. The world wasn't as the philosophers taught. The sky wasn't made of perfection. The universe wasn't simple. It was alive. Wild, full of secrets. He looked again, and again, and again. Each time the same truth stared back at him. Then Galileo turned the telescope toward Jupiter and saw something even more impossible. 4 tiny lights moving around the planet. Not stars, not illusions. Moons. Real moons. Orbiting Jupiter. If Jupiter had moons that revolved around it, then Earth was not the only center. Earth was not unique. Earth was not the middle of everything. Galileo lowered the telescope slowly. His heart was beating fast. His breath was heavy. He understood something dangerous. The universe did not revolve around Earth. And if people learned this, everything could collapse. Religion, philosophy, power, fear. But truth doesn't wait. Truth doesn't hide. Galileo whispered to the night sky, "People must see what I see." He didn't know yet that sharing this truth would place him in direct conflict with the most powerful institution of his time. He didn't know they would try to silence him, but he also didn't know that his discovery would echo through centuries and reach millions of people long after he was gone. When truth became dangerous. The morning after Galileo's discoveries, the world looked different to him. The streets of Padua were the same, the buildings the same, the people the same. But Galileo knew something they didn't. The universe had rules that no one had ever seen, and now he had the key to unlock them. He walked through the university with the energy of a man carrying a secret too big for his chest. He needed to share it. He needed people to understand. He needed the world to open its eyes. So Galileo invited students, professors, merchants, soldiers, anyone who would listen to look through his telescope, and one by one they gasped. Some laughed in amazement. Some couldn't believe their eyes. Some were frightened by what they saw. But everyone realized one thing. Galileo's telescope showed a universe no one had imagined. Soon, word spread across Italy, then across Europe. Galileo has discovered mountains on the moon. Galileo says Jupiter has moons. Galileo challenges Aristotle. Galileo questions the church. Letters arrived from kings, scientists, and nobles. People begged him to teach them, to show them, to explain the impossible. Galileo's fame exploded, but fame brings attention. And not all attention is friendly. The church, which controlled knowledge, power, and truth, began to watch him closely. At that time, the church taught that Earth was the center of everything. It was not a scientific idea. It was a religious one. To question it was to question authority. To question authority was to commit danger, maybe even heresy. And now Galileo's telescope threatened everything. One cold evening, as Galileo read letters in his study, a friend rushed into his room. "Galileo, you must be careful." Galileo looked up. "Why? What happened?" "Your ideas. They are spreading too fast. The church leaders are worried." "No, more than worried. They are angry." Galileo closed the letter he was holding. "They can be angry," he said calmly, "but truth is not a crime." His friend shook his head. "But they do not see it that way." Silence filled the room. Galileo knew what that meant. He knew that sharing the truth could cost him everything: his career, his freedom, even his life. But he also knew something even more important. If he stayed silent, the world would remain blind. So he made a decision. He would write a book that explained everything he had seen, a book that used observation, not faith, not tradition, to describe the universe. He called it The Sidereal Messenger. When it was published in 1610, Europe shook. The book became a sensation. People lined up to get a copy. Scientists celebrated. Students cheered. But in Rome, in the high walls of the Vatican, powerful men sat around a long wooden table and whispered, "Galileo is dangerous. Galileo spreads confusion. Galileo must be stopped." And so, the first shadows of trouble began to fall over his life. Galileo did not see them yet. He was still shining, still rising, still discovering. But those shadows were growing, slowly, silently. Soon, they would catch him, and the greatest battle of his life was still ahead. The city of power, Rome, the center of religion, politics, and fear. A city where decisions could change the world and destroy a man's life. When Galileo arrived in Rome in 1611, the streets were crowded with horses, merchants, priests, and nobles dressed in bright colors. Bells rang from every tower. The air smelled of stone, incense, and power. Galileo stepped out of his carriage and looked around. He wasn't just a scientist visiting the capital. He was a man walking into the heart of an empire that did not like surprises. But Rome welcomed him. At first, cardinals invited him to dinners. Princes asked him questions. Scholars argued, debated, and tested his ideas. In grand halls decorated with gold and marble, Galileo demonstrated his telescope to the elite of Europe. When they looked through the lens, their reactions were the same: shock, wonder, silence. Galileo smiled politely. He knew that truth didn't need drama, it only needed eyes. But not everyone was impressed. In quiet corners of the Vatican, priests gathered secretly. This telescope deceives people. He wants to destroy church teaching. This is a threat. Galileo wasn't in the room, but their voices traveled through Rome like cold wind. One afternoon, Galileo was invited to a private meeting with Cardinal Bellarmine, one of the most respected and influential church leaders. Inside the room, the walls were covered with paintings of saints. The air was heavy with incense. Cardinal Bellarmine sat behind a large desk, his expression calm, but unreadable. "Signor Galileo," he said softly, "your work is impressive." Galileo bowed. "Thank you, Your Eminence." But, the cardinal continued, "your ideas, especially the idea that Earth moves around the sun, are dangerous." Galileo didn't move. His heart beat faster, but his voice stayed calm. "I only describe what nature shows," he said. Cardinal Bellarmine leaned forward. "You may study the heavens, but you must not teach that Earth moves. Many people cannot understand the difference between science and theology. Your words could confuse them." This was not a threat. Not yet. It was a warning. A gentle one, but still a warning. Galileo left the meeting with a heavy feeling in his chest. He looked up at the sky above Rome, the same sky he had studied for years, the same sky that told him the truth, the same sky that now placed him in danger. Could he stop sharing what he knew? Could he stay silent while people believed something false? He knew the answer. He had always known the answer, but at that moment, he also realized something else. The more truth he discovered, the more enemies he created. Still, his fame continued to grow. More students traveled to see him. More nobles wanted to learn from him. And he believed, perhaps too confidently, that his ideas were unstoppable. But in Rome, the whispers continued, and soon they would become orders, and orders become chains. Galileo left the city feeling both powerful and fragile. He did not know it yet, but the next time he returned to Rome, everything would change. The warning that changed everything. Years passed, and Galileo's fame spread across Italy like sunlight over a quiet morning sea. Students admired him, scientists debated him, and rulers invited him to their courts. But with every discovery he made, with every truth he revealed, powerful eyes were watching him more closely. In 1632, Galileo published one of the most important books of his life, a dialogue that compared two great ideas about the universe: the old belief that Earth stood still, and the new vision that the Earth itself moved around the sun. He wrote it as a conversation, simple and clear, so anyone could read it. And people did. Everywhere. The book exploded across Europe. In universities, young scholars whispered about it. In noble courts, advisors argued over its logic. And in the halls of the church, shadows deepened. His ideas were no longer just science. They were dangerous. They were shaking foundations. Then one morning, a letter arrived at Galileo's door. It was written in the formal, heavy language of authority. The letter ordered him to appear in Rome. No discussion, no invitation. It was a summons. Galileo knew exactly what it meant. He was old now. His back hurt. His hands trembled, and yet he packed his bags, kissed his home goodbye, and began the long journey to Rome, knowing that when he arrived, he would face the most powerful court in the world. Every night on the road, he lay awake staring at the ceiling of small inns, thinking about truth. Could truth survive fear? Could he survive defending it? But deep inside, a quiet voice stayed alive. The universe does not change just because someone says it must. And so he continued toward Rome, toward judgment, toward history. The Court of Questions. When Galileo entered Rome, the city felt like a giant with stone bones. The churches were huge, the palaces larger, and everywhere he turned, someone was whispering. They all knew why he had come. The trial began in a silent room filled with men in dark robes, their faces calm, but their eyes sharp. Galileo stood before them. He was tired, but he held his ground. The questioning started softly. Did you write this book? Did you support the idea that the earth moves? Did you mislead the public? Galileo answered honestly. He said he had only described what the telescope showed. He had only followed the evidence. But in that room, evidence mattered less than obedience. Days passed, weeks passed. The questions became sharper, colder. Galileo felt the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders. They were not only judging his book, they were judging his freedom to think. Sometimes the judges spoke kindly, like friends. Sometimes their words carried quiet threats. It was a dance, a dangerous one. At night, Galileo sat alone in his small room, listening to the city outside. He thought of the stars he once watched freely. He thought of the moon's craters he had drawn, the planets he had tracked, the truths he had uncovered. Now the world that once celebrated him was preparing to silence him. The court wanted one thing: for him to say he had been wrong, not scientifically wrong, politically wrong, socially wrong, religiously wrong. And as the pressure grew, Galileo realized that his next answer could decide the rest of his life. The sentence and the silent words. The day of judgment arrived like a slow, heavy storm. Galileo, now weak and visibly tired, walked into the grand hall where the final decision would be announced. The room was full. Priests, scholars, officials, all staring at the man who had dared to challenge the universe they believed in. The air was thick. The silence felt like stone. A judge stood up and unrolled a long scroll. His voice echoed across the chamber as he listed Galileo's mistakes: disturbing the public, spreading dangerous ideas, questioning the natural order. Every accusation felt like a hammer hitting the table. Finally, the judge spoke the words everyone had been waiting for. You must renounce your belief that the earth moves around the sun. Galileo froze. He knew this moment would come, but now that it was here, it felt unreal. This was not a scientific debate anymore. It was survival. He looked down at his old hands. These hands had built telescopes, written books, drawn the moon. They had touched the future, and now he had to choose: protect the truth and risk losing everything, or bend to the will of power and live to think another day. After a long pause, Galileo spoke. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. He signed the paper. He said the words they wanted to hear. The room relaxed. The judges nodded. The trial was over. But as Galileo turned to leave, history remembers that he murmured something under his breath, a small sentence that would echo for centuries. And yet it moves. A secret declaration, a final spark of rebellion, a reminder that truth does not need permission to exist. He was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. No more teaching, no more public writing, no more freedom. But they did not understand one thing. You can lock a man in a house, but you cannot stop a mind that has already reached the stars. The Prison of Silence. Galileo returned to his home under guard, not as a free scientist, but as a prisoner with walls instead of chains. The house was silent, the rooms cold, and outside his windows the world continued to move, even if he was no longer allowed to say so. He was old now. His legs hurt when he walked. His eyes, once sharp enough to discover moons and planets, were fading. But his mind was still fierce, still alive, still burning. Friends visited him in secret. Some whispered their admiration, others their fears. They asked him if he regretted his choice. Galileo only smiled gently, as if he knew something they didn't. He may have spoken the words they demanded, but no one could erase the truth he had already given to the world. Almost every day, Galileo sat at his small wooden desk, the same place where he had once written boldly. The ink dried slowly, the papers piled up quietly. He couldn't publish freely anymore, but he could still think, still calculate, still push science forward from the shadows. Outside his window, the seasons changed. Winter winds scratched the glass. Birds arrived and left again. Life continued, even if he remained trapped. But Galileo refused to let silence consume him. Instead, he started working on the most ambitious scientific book of his entire life, a masterpiece that would reshape physics forever. He did it secretly, slowly, painfully, writing with weakening hands and fading eyes. Even under arrest, even near the end of his life, he created ideas that future scientists, Newton, Einstein, and many more, would build upon. He was locked inside a house, but his thoughts escaped every wall. And so, in that quiet prison, Galileo prepared for one final act, the work that would ensure his legacy could never be erased. The Last Great Book. Galileo's eyesight was failing quickly now. Some mornings he woke to a world so blurred it felt like he was underwater. The man who once mapped the heavens could barely read a sentence. Yet he refused to surrender. He worked with assistants who read to him, wrote for him, and helped him check every line. Young scholars traveled long distances just to sit by his dim window and hear him speak. They came quietly, entering his home like visitors to a secret temple, afraid of attracting attention, but unable to stay away. Because even in captivity, Galileo's mind was a universe. His final project was not about stars or planets. It was deeper, more fundamental. He wanted to explain how motion works, why objects fall, why they accelerate, why the world behaves the way it does. He wanted to describe the mathematics behind nature itself. And so he wrote a book about force, motion, and physics. A book that would survive longer than any courtroom, any accusation, any punishment. A book that would change science forever. Every page was a battle, every paragraph a victory. Sometimes he rested his shaking hands on the wooden desk and whispered, "Just a little more, just one more idea." And he pushed on, even when his body begged him to stop. Finally, after years of quiet struggle, the book was finished. He could not publish it in Italy. It was forbidden. But he found a friend in the Netherlands, a place where ideas flew more freely, where curiosity was not a crime. The manuscript was smuggled out, hidden in bags, carried across borders in secret. Months later, Galileo held a copy in his old hands. The cover was simple, but inside it contained the future. Even though he could hardly see it, he touched the pages like they were pieces of his own soul. He knew that long after he was gone, long after the men who judged him were forgotten, these ideas would rise. And they did. This book became one of the foundations of modern science. It shaped the work of Isaac Newton, who later said he could see further because he stood on the shoulders of giants. One of those giants was an old man, half blind, imprisoned in his own home, still fighting for truth with everything he had left. The final days and the infinite sky. The years passed slowly inside the walls of Galileo's home, but his spirit never softened, even when his eyes finally failed completely and the world went dark. He refused to disappear into silence. He listened, he questioned, he taught. Young students continued to come to him, moving quietly through the halls so the guards wouldn't complain. They sat around him as he spoke into the darkness, describing the universe he could no longer see. A universe he understood better than anyone alive. He explained motion, gravity, light, planets. He talked about courage. He talked about truth. He spoke not like a defeated prisoner, but like a man standing on the edge of a great discovery, ready to step forward. Outside his window, the sky continued its endless performance. The same sky he had once mapped with a telescope he built himself. The moons of Jupiter danced around their king. The earth turned silently on its axis. The sun held everything in its invisible grip. The universe had not changed. Only humans had to catch up. On a quiet January night in 1642, Galileo lay in his bed, breathing slowly. The house was still. The lamps were dim. The world seemed to hold its breath. A student sat beside him, holding his hand, knowing the moment was near. Galileo whispered something softly, a final thought, a final spark from a mind that had given everything. "We are carried by the truth," he said, "and the truth always moves. Those were among his last words. He passed away peacefully, at home, surrounded not by his judges, but by the next generation of thinkers, the ones who would carry his ideas forward. The church silenced his voice, but the universe amplified it. His discoveries lived on. His books lived on. His courage lived on. And long after his death, the world finally admitted what he had known all along. The earth does move, the planets do orbit, and curiosity is stronger than fear. Galileo was gone, but his sky, the sky he revealed to humanity, remained forever open. The legacy that outlived the universe. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell, kings, queens, leaders, and entire nations changed with time, but Galileo's name, it refused to fade. In the quiet halls of universities, students still whisper about him, the man who challenged the sky. In laboratories across the world, scientists repeat experiments that follow the principles he discovered in the darkness of his home. In every telescope pointed toward Jupiter, his moons still orbit like loyal witnesses to his courage. Even the church, which once judged him, eventually admitted their mistake. A rare act in history. Galileo's truth had won. Today, every rocket that leaves Earth, every satellite that circles the planet, every spacecraft that explores the solar system carries a piece of his legacy, because modern science stands on foundations he built with trembling hands and an unbreakable mind. He proved that the universe is not what we are told. It is what we discover. He taught humanity that questioning is not rebellion. It is progress. That curiosity is not danger. It is destiny. That truth does not belong to the powerful. It belongs to everyone willing to see. If you close your eyes and imagine the night sky with its stars scattered like diamonds across infinite darkness, you will see Galileo's fingerprints there, in every orbit, in every equation, in every satellite crossing the horizon. His life was not easy. His victories were not simple, but his impact was eternal. Galileo Galilei did not just change science, he changed the human spirit. He proved that one single person, with one simple instrument, pointing toward one shining star, can shake the entire world. And even now, 400 years later, when we whisper his name, we still feel the universe move. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If Galileo's story inspired you even a little, please smash that like, hit subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves great stories. Your support means the world. See you in the next adventure.